we all have our own biases, and so we have to make sure that when we do this data, when we look at things, we're aware of the different biases that people have, different ways, and that people respond to things based off of who they are, their position, their job, their race or ethnicity, their age, whatever it is. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at today, is the idea of biased versus unbiased. How can we ask a question, a survey, okay, so that it's unbiased, so that we know that it's good data, right? It's something that we can rely on, not like my unicorn question where you're like, nah, Mr. Leong, that doesn't fly. Okay, so let's talk about it. Let's start with unbiased, actually. All right, unbiased surveys, okay, they're good surveys. They're valid, another way, and they are representative. Okay. If a survey is unbiased, you could use it to represent other people. So my survey, my unicorn survey, okay, it doesn't represent everybody, right? If I asked what's your favorite animal, but I only asked a very small group of people, they don't represent the entire world. Now we do these surveys because we can't ask everybody in the entire world, right? There are 330 million people in the United States. Do you think every time someone does a survey, they're going to say, well, I better go start asking all 330 million? No. You ask a smaller group that hopefully represents the larger group. All right, so there's two kinds of unbiased samples we're going to talk about. Okay, two kinds that are good to go. The first one is called a simple random sample. Okay, simple random sample. The word random is really good in taking surveys, because if it's random, then you don't know who you're picking and who's supposed to do that. So the key to a simple random sample is this: everyone is equally likely to be chosen. So a good way to look at this is think, okay, if this survey was given, do I have a chance to answer it? Do I have a chance, an equal chance as my brother, as my friend, or whatever, to answer the survey? Do we all have an equal shot? So here's, let's write down some examples, okay? So for example, if I was to let's say I was to put all your names, write down everyone's names, put in a hat, and then just pull it out randomly. I didn't look. I'm not looking for anyone specific. Okay. I'm just gonna say, you know, whoever answered this question, and I pull out just a random name. It's random, right? Each one of you, okay, there's about 23 of you in this class, has an equal chance of being chosen, right? But it doesn't matter how long your name is, what it starts with, anything like that. If I just write them down on pieces of paper and I just said, okay, let me just pick one out. Let's pick one out randomly. Okay, random's the big question. That's good, because that way everyone is fair, right? You want something that's fair, right? Another good example, okay, is let's say you stand in front of the store and then you just ask, you stand there for like an hour and you just ask people whatever question, right? So you stand in front of, you have to pick a location that like you might see a lot of different people, but like so like the store or just a random street corner, and you just say, okay, I'm gonna just stand in one place and I'm gonna let whoever walks by me, I'm gonna ask them the question, what's your favorite animal, right? Why is that good? Because you don't know who's gonna come by you. It could be kids, it could be adults, it could be people of Hispanic heritage. It could be Asians. It could be old person. It could be someone who has a job, someone who doesn't. People who have dogs. People who don't. Like, it could be everybody. Anybody could come, right? Anybody. That's the key. So, like, so I'll say another example is, you stand at a random corner and ask random people. Right? Like, that's how you do a good survey, right? You want to be random. If you want it to really represent everybody, then you just say, okay, I'm gonna make it so I have no idea who's gonna come, and I don't know what the answer is gonna be. That's a good thing too. If it's really random, you don't know what's gonna happen, right? You really don't know. You don't know who's gonna answer. You don't know who you're gonna pick. You don't know what's gonna happen. And it's good because if you do that, there's a better chance of you finding someone who represents everybody. Okay. So again, the key is equal chance. The key is randomness. The key is, like, just you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen, which is good. You don't want to know what's going to happen, right? Because look, if I was going to go and say, let's say I had a different survey. Let's say I said, okay, I'm going to ask, should students get more homework? Now, if I ask students, just students, then of course they're going to say no, right? But what if I asked some students, some parents, some teachers, right? Some people who don't even have kids in the school, whatever. That will give me a better idea of everybody, right? There's no point in me just asking you guys, should I give you more homework, right? I pretty much know already most of you are going to say, no, Mr. Young, I think we're good. Okay. And if I asked your parents would say, yeah, definitely. They need more stuff to do, right? So those surveys aren't good. They're not random enough, right? I need to be able to get a whole lot of different people so it represents everybody. That makes sense? Okay. Now, if I'm only trying to get a representative sample of students, then I would only ask students. That's kind of different. Okay. The second type of random sample is what we call a systematic random sample. An example of this would be like, pick every third person on a list. Again, the key is I don't know who I'm going to pick. I don't know anything about them. So, for example, if I was to look at this class and I just said, okay, I'm going to pick the every third person, right? I don't know unless you guys really like want to calculate it, like, and say, okay, well, let me put all of our names alphabetically and then see whatever. Like, you don't know who's going to get chosen. So in this class, right, every third person would be 1, 2, 3, Amy, 1, 2, 3, Jacob, 1, 2, 3, Lily, 1, 2, 3, Nee, 1, 2, 3, Peyton. Like, you don't know if you're going to get chosen, and you don't know if you're not going to get chosen until your name passes by on that list, right? Again, everyone's equally likely to be chosen, right? Because I could have said third, I could have said fourth, I could have said every other person. You just don't know. And all it takes to mess it up is, well, someone else shows up a little bit late in the class, and all of a sudden now you were the third person, now you're not. Like, again, it's super random. That's the key, right? So if I was going to ask, what's your favorite animal, and I just did it like this, I said every third person. I put everyone's name. There's 550 kids in the whole school. I said I'm just going to ask every third person. Then yeah, you have no idea if you're going to get chosen, and that's what's key, right? So unbiased surveys are good. The key is they are random. They because of that, they're what we call representative. They represent everyone else. That's what we want. Okay. It's not too narrowly focused. Again, if I just ask fourth grade girls do not represent you, seventh grade boys and girls. Okay. Think about what you liked when you were a fourth grader. Go ahead, take a second, think about it. Do you still like that stuff now? Maybe some things. Okay. Maybe not. Right. So that's what you have to kind of consider, is like, okay, think about that. That you want something that represents that you want to be represented fairly. Okay, so now let's look at the bad type of surveys. These ones are biased. These are bad. They're not valid. Okay, not representative. Right? These ones are not so good. Okay, not so good. And there are two kinds of bias samples that, and I'm going to give you kind of some good examples of why these ones would not work. Okay. The first kind is what we call a convenience sample. It's called a convenience sample because it's easy to get. It's a little bit lazy. It really doesn't it doesn't represent everybody because you only ask like a certain group, ask like a small group. And here's the thing for these ones: if you know the answer to the question before you ask it, it's not a good survey. Because if you know what the people are going to say, then it's not a good survey. So here's some examples of a convenience sample. Okay. Let's say I was going to do this. Let's say I gave a survey, or it was my job to find out who is the best math teacher at Muscatel. But let's say I only asked my students. Okay. Let's say I only asked you guys. I hope that you would mostly say Mr. Leong is the best math teacher. And then I could go back to the principal and I said, yes, look at that. I'm the best math teacher because 100% of students that I surveyed said Mr. Leong's the best. Okay. The problem is you have only had me as your math teacher. Okay. Some of you don't even know who the other math teachers are. You've never seen them in person or anything like that. And you have no idea because you've never been in their classes. Right. So this is a convenience sample, right? Because I'm being lazy and I'm only asking my own students. Right. So here's the example, right? Mr. Leong. Oh, sorry. Let me use that. Okay. If I was to do a survey and I said, who's the best math teacher? And I only asked my own students, okay? And then I said, look, 100% of students think I'm the best, I'm the greatest. Okay. It doesn't make sense, right? It's convenient for me, okay? But it doesn't work that way, right? If you already know the answer, okay, and I'm assuming you will say me, by the way, okay? So I'm assuming I know the answer. If you don't like me, that's okay, right? But that's it, right? Here's another example. What if you went and you want to find out what's everyone's favorite kind of music? Okay, so let's say you asked favorite music. That's a good question. What kind of favorite music do you like? But what if you ask that question at a rock concert? Do we think we know what they're going to say? If I went to a rock concert, okay, I went to go see a rock band, And then I went around and I asked the people, hey, what kind of music do you like? What's your favorite kind of music? Do we know what they're going to say? They're going to say rock music, right? If you bought a ticket to a rock show, you probably like rock music. I think that's a safe assumption. What do you guys think? Right? So you see how that's it's definitely biased, right? Like if I took that information and I said, look, everybody likes rock music. Well, no, yeah, people at rock concerts like rock music, but what about the people who aren't at the concert? How do we know what they like, right? Now, how do I fix this, right? Well, what if I went to the grocery store and I asked people what's their favorite kind of music? Oh, yeah, that's pretty random, right? Like people at a grocery store, again, I might have rock fans, I might have rap fans, hip hop fans, country fans. I don't know. I don't know the answer. And that's what's key there. Okay. One more example of a bias survey. Okay. Um, is again, if you ask only a certain group, right? So um, if you survey, we'll use our, 10 fourth graders to represent all students. Okay, so this is like the unicorn question, right? If I asked just 10 fourth graders and they're like, oh, yes, we love unicorns, right? Like that doesn't, they don't represent us, okay? I have, my niece is in fourth grade and she thinks about things she sees the world very differently than I do. Very, very differently, okay? I'm not going to rely on her opinion to figure out on everything. She loves chocolate, right? If it was up to her, every food would be made out of chocolate, okay? So I'm not gonna go with her what she's gonna say. Doesn't seem like just doesn't seem very practical. Okay, there's one more type of bias sample, and it's called the voluntary response. And the problem with this is only people who care enough will respond. And there's also with these voluntary response ones, it's like it takes like more than one step. Like you have to return the sample. You have to come back and do something else, right? Like you have to. There's an extra step. So here's an example. Okay, let's say for example, I was to give you guys a survey of just how can I make the school better. All right. Now, if I put that in the chat, I put it in a link in Google Classroom, everyone has a chance to answer it. No problem, right? It could just be a real simple, make lunch longer, or people can just type in, make lunch longer, or less homework, all that stuff. Like easy, like everyone can do it, right? That's fine. Now, what if I told you this? What if I told you though the only way to take the survey was you had to hand the survey to the principal. You had to print it out and hand it to the principal. Now, in the first case, most of you, if I just put a link in the chat, you're already on your computers, you could just say, oh, got it. Okay. I'll do that survey, Mr. Leong. 2 questions, click a couple buttons, type some stuff in, no problem. How many of you guys would take the time to come all the way to school and hand it to the principal? I'm going to guess less, right? Some of you is like, it's okay, Mr. Leong. I'll just stay home, right? This is what we call a voluntary response sample, right? Because I made it too hard for people to actually answer it, okay, where they had to come back and do it again, then they're not going to do it. And so you miss out on people, right? Only the people who really, really care are going to do that. And if those people's voices do not represent everybody. It doesn't represent the people who don't care. It doesn't represent the people who couldn't find a ride to school. It doesn't represent the people who are scared of visiting the principal. Okay, like it's got to be fair for everybody, right? So example is, if you must turn in to the principal, or another example would be like, you must call a certain number to take the survey, right? Like how many of us actually make phone calls these days, right? We all text and we all message and all that, you know, like if I had told you had to pick up your phone and actually dial and make a phone call, most of you are like, nah, pass. You have to talk to someone on the phone. Nah, I wouldn't want to do it, right? Like if you make it where only certain people are actually going to do it, then it's not going to work out, okay? So I know I've been talking a while about these different kind of things, and the question is, well, Mr. Lang, why are we learning this? Why is it any important? Because we have to think about it, right? We have to think about how we need to be able to see in our everyday lives how things might be biased, how things might be unbiased, things might be twisted to make us think one thing when it's really not that true. Okay. Again, if if I'm going to throw a party and I want to know what kind of music I'm supposed to play, but I took a survey and I only asked those people at the rock concert, so I'm like, oh, I must play rock music in my concert, right? I made a decision based off of bad information, right? I got bad information. Okay. You guys, same thing, right? Like if the principal, right, goes and looks at the surveys that she got, and the number one thing says we need to make lunch shorter and we need more time for like harder classes, right? Like more homework. Well, that's because only the certain kids who really care enough, who really want to come back and do the homework and do all the stuff, they're the only ones that are answering that survey, right? You guys who are too lazy to go do it, you're like, no, that's not what we want. Well, guess what? You didn't answer because you're too lazy, right? So we have to understand how these things really affect, right? And how we use it too. I do it all the time. Sometimes I'll just be like, the other day I asked one of the other classes, I asked them, hey, are Crocs cool? Right? And they're like, yeah. And then, but if I go and ask some of my adult friends, they'd be like, I don't know so much about it. Like, so I shouldn't just go buy a bunch of Crocs just because about 7 seventh graders told me to, right? I got to understand there's some bias there. There's some different things that make our decisions. Okay. So what we want to look at are things that are good, simple and random, or systematic random. Okay. Everyone has a chance to answer. That's the big key. Everybody has a chance to answer, and thus we are good. It represents everybody. If everyone has a chance to, then that means that someone that's like you or has the same opinion will most likely answer. Maybe not you particularly, but someone like you. Okay. If I was to stand in front of Rite Aid and just ask random people, there's a good chance that some kids will come in. There's a good chance that adults will be there. There's a good chance that people of different races will come in. So that's what we want. Nice and random. All right. So let's